Welcome to the deep dive, where we get into the really fascinating research and pull out those aha moments for you. Today, we're looking at something that honestly feels a bit like magic with large language models, LLMs. Their ability to learn new stuff, follow new instructions, even generate completely new kinds of text just from a couple of examples you stick in the prompt. This isn't training as we usually think about it, that big, slow process. It's called in-context learning, or ICL. And that brings us to the core puzzle, the real mystery we want to unpack today. How on earth do these models, these incredibly complex things, manage to learn new tricks after they're fully trained? Their weights are supposed to be fixed, right?
Yeah.
But they learn just from the prompt examples with no obvious changes inside, no explicit weight updates.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for decades in machine learning, learning always meant one thing. You update the model's weights,
Yeah.
you run optimization like gradient descent. ICL just seems to bypass that. It's like the model is learning without actually learning. In the traditional sense, it's been a huge theoretical question mark.
Right. So our mission today is to get into this really interesting new research paper that thinks it's cracked it. It's proposing something pretty groundbreaking, that LLMs are doing weight updates during ICL, but they're hidden, implicit, like a kind of secret adjustment happening inside. Stick with us, and you'll get a real handle on one of the most puzzling but powerful aspects of modern AI. We're aiming for those genuine aha moments. Okay, so let's just double click on this in-context learning thing again. It's when you give the LLM, say, a few examples of input-output pairs right there in the prompt after it's finished all its pre-training, and boom, it suddenly gets the pattern, maybe even learns a whole new function it wasn't explicitly trained on.
It's like showing a trained pianist a weird new chord progression just once, and they can immediately improvise using it. No practice needed, seemingly. And yeah, that's why it's been such a head-scratcher for the field, because as you said, learning has always been tied to this explicit process of changing weights during training, optimization, finding the right parameters. But with ICL, the model's parameters are supposedly frozen. Inference time means prediction time, not learning time, traditionally. So the model seems to, I don't know, reconfigure itself somehow, based purely on the prompt context, how that mechanism was just, well, largely unknown, a black box, really.
And people have tried to explain it before, haven't they? There were theories floating around.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Some researchers had suggested maybe there's some kind of implicit weight update happening. There were even studies showing that, very simple toy models of transformer blocks might implicitly do something like gradient descent.
Ah, but toy models is the key phrase there, right? These previous ideas often had pretty strict limits.
Exactly. They often worked only for, say, linear layers or required the prompt examples to be structured in a very specific way. They didn't necessarily scale up or explain the complex transformers we actually use.
So the big question was, does this idea hold for the real deal? For the massive general models out there? That was the gap. Okay, so let's unpack how this new paper tries to bridge that gap. What's their novel approach?
Well, instead of simplifying the model down to something unrealistic, they sort of went the other way. They abstracted up. They took a key property of the attention mechanism, how the model weighs different parts of the input, and generalized it. This allowed them to define something they call a contextual block, which is like a more general version of a standard transformer block.
A contextual block. Okay, so what is that exactly?
Think of it like this. It has a contextual layer, which captures the essence of that self-attention interaction, how context influences representation. And that layer is stacked with a standard neural network component, like an MLP, a multi-layer perceptron. And this generalization is really important because it lets them analyze the core mechanism without getting bogged down in all the complexities of a full transformer. But it's still much closer to the real thing than those earlier toy models. Yeah. And here's the punchline, the core breakthrough. They show mathematically that this setup, the contextual layer plus the neural network, it implicitly transforms the context provided in the prompt into a weight update for the first layer of that neural network, the MLP part.
Whoa, hang on. So the context, the examples I type in, they're effectively changing the model's weights on the fly.
Implicitly, yes. That's the idea. It's like the context is being used to directly calculate a modification to the MLP's weights.
Okay, that's pretty wild. So the paper calls this implicit fine-tuning.
Exactly. It shifts the perspective. The context isn't just passive information the model looks at. It actively helps the model load the network weights suitable to the context, as the paper puts it. It's like the model adjusts its internal machinery, its parameters, based on the specific task hinted at by the prompt examples. A dynamic adaptation.
So how does that work? Did they figure out the math behind it, like how the weights get updated?
They did. That's a major contribution. They provide an explicit mathematical formula
Yeah.
for this implicit weight update. And what's really fascinating, mathematically speaking, is that this update takes a very specific form. It's a rank 1 matrix.
Okay, rank 1 matrix. Let's pause there. For listeners maybe not deep in linear algebra, what does that mean? Why is rank 1 significant?
Right, good point. So think of the model's weight matrix as this huge grid of numbers representing its knowledge. A rank 1 update is a very simple, very structured kind of change to that grid. It's not adding complexity everywhere. It's like adding just one single specific dimension or pattern to the existing knowledge. It's efficient, it's targeted, it's not a chaotic rewrite. It's a precise tweak.
Ah, okay. So it's a simple structured change, not some messy overhaul. That makes sense.
Precisely. And their main theorem, Theorem 2.2, basically says that the influence of any part of the input context corresponds to one of these rank 1 updates. Then Corollary 2.3.1 builds on that, saying the entire context, all of the examples you provide, translates into a cumulative rank 1 update to those MLP weights.
The whole prompt leads to one overall tweak.
Yeah, and they show it even works for standard transformer blocks with things like skip connections, where even other parameters like biases get implicitly updated too. It's quite comprehensive.
So if these updates are happening based on the context, how does it play out over time as the model reads the prompt, like token by token? Is it one big update at the end, or?
Great question. That gets into the dynamics. Proposition 3.1 addresses this. It shows that this iterative process, as the model consumes each token from the prompt, actually looks like a form of stochastic gradient updates.
Wait, gradient updates like in normal training?
Exactly like that. Essentially, the tokens in the prompt act like mini data points. And the model performs these implicit updates, which behave just like gradient descent steps, trying to minimize some internal loss based on the context.
Wow.
And crucially, just like in regular training, this implicit gradient tends to vanish as the model processes more context. It converges. It finds a good implicit setting for that context.
So learning, like actual gradient-based learning, is happening right there at inference time. That's a fundamental shift in thinking.
It really is. It suggests the model is actively learning from the prompt itself, using dynamics very similar to its original training, but implicitly.
Okay, that's a compelling theory. But theory is one thing. How do they actually test this? Did they manage to, see this implicit weight stuff happening in a real model? Where does the rubber meet the road?
Right, the experimental validation is key. They designed some clever experiments. They trained a fairly simple transformer model, specifically on prompts that involved linear functions. This is a task where ICL is known to work well, and it's easier to analyze. Then, their main goal was to check if the model's output, the in-context prompt, let's call that TWCX, was the same as the output without the prompt, but where they manually changed the MLP weights according to their derived formula. Let's call that TW plus GWX.
Ah, so comparing the ICL effect directly against the effect of their calculated implicit weight change.
Exactly. If the outputs match, it means their formula correctly captures the effect of the ICL.
And did they match? What did the results show?
The paper reports remarkable agreement. If you look at their figure 1, the validation loss curves for the two scenarios, ICL versus implicit update, are practically identical.
Wow, okay, so that's strong evidence.
It's strong empirical confirmation that, yes, this implicit weight transfer mechanism they described seems to be really happening, and their formula accurately predicts its effect.
And what about that convergence idea? The gradient vanishing?
They check that too. In their figure 2, they plot how much the implicit weight update changes as more context tokens are processed. And just as the theory predicts for gradient descent, the size of these updates gets smaller and smaller, eventually vanishing. The model effectively settles on the right implicit weights for that context.
So the model's behavior really lines up with the theory. Did they also compare this implicit learning to standard fine-tuning, the explicit kind?
Yes, they did. Figure 3 shows this comparison. Now, the mechanisms are different. Obviously, one is implicit during inference, the other is explicit during a separate training phase. But what they found is that both processes, the implicit ICL dynamics and explicit fine-tuning, tend to minimize the prediction loss in very similar ways. They follow similar paths towards a good solution for the task defined by the context or the fine-tuning data.
That's fascinating. It suggests there's maybe a deep connection, right? Like the fundamental way neural networks learn might be similar, whether it's explicit training or this implicit adaptation.
It really points towards that, yeah. A kind of underlying computational equivalence, maybe.
Okay, so wrapping this part up, this research seems like a significant step forward. It gives us a general mechanism for ICL, this implicit weight update idea that gets past the limitations of earlier theories.
Definitely. It provides a much more solid theoretical foundation for understanding ICL in realistic transformer-like models. But to be fair, the authors themselves are clear about the limitations too.
Right, always important. What are the caveats here?
Well, their main analysis focuses on a single transformer block. Real LLMs have many layers stacked together, and how these implicit updates interact across layers isn't fully covered yet. Also, they mostly analyze the effect on the prediction for the very last input token, not necessarily the whole process of generating a long sequence of text, which involves feeding outputs back in as inputs.
Okay, so future work needed to see how it scales to deeper models and full generation.
Exactly, those are natural next steps.
But even with those limitations, the core insight here feels pretty fundamental. It suggests that maybe ICL isn't just some quirky property of the self-attention mechanism alone.
Right, it might be tapping into something deeper, a more general capability of these kinds of neural networks, this ability to implicitly translate information from their inputs directly into changes in their internal parameters, their weights.
A fundamental property of learning networks themselves.
And thinking about that, well, it raises some big questions, doesn't it? If this implicit adaptation is a core property, what does that mean for designing better AI? Could we leverage this?
Yeah, could we build models that are inherently more adaptive, more efficient at learning new things on the fly?
Maybe it opens doors to new forms of customization, personalization, or even allowing models to learn continuously in new situations without constant, costly retraining. It's definitely food for thought.
Absolutely. So, the big takeaway for you listening today. In context learning, that seemingly magical ability of LLMs, it might not be magic after all. This research suggests it's driven by a hidden, implicit rewiring of the model's weights, happening right there in the prompt, mimicking the dynamics of traditional learning. And here's a final thought to chew on. If LLMs are constantly performing this subtle, implicit fine-tuning with every interaction, every prompt you give them, how does that change how we should think about interacting with them or even designing them? Could harnessing this hidden learning capability unlock even more powerful, adaptable AI in the future? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you found those aha moments. Catch you on the next one.